Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Product School webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Just in case you didn't know, Product School offers product management certificates online and at our 20 campuses worldwide. On top of that, every week we offer some amazing local product management events and host online webinars, live streams, and Ask Me Anything sessions. Head over to productschool.com after this webinar to check them out.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Morgan, and I'm here with Product School today to talk to you about one aspect of the soft skills side of product management that I think is super important and has been something that I have been working on and practicing and learning throughout my career, and it's about asking questions. And we're going to talk about this in the context of product management when it comes to interviewing your customers, but I think this is a technique that can be useful in all across different aspects of your life when it comes to personal relationships, working with internal stakeholders, your colleagues, etc. So I think it's a great tool to have in your arsenal, and just can't stress enough how important this is to learn as you kind of progress through your career and you spend a lot of time trying to get information from your customers. So just to start out a little bit about me, I am a senior product manager at EverTrue in Boston. My background is engineering, and I've been working in a product role for the past 6 years, and it's been an awesome fit. One of the bigger challenges for me really has been that soft skills side of things. I came from a very analytical background. So this is something that I've really made a big effort to kind of perfect and continue to work on as I grow. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is why. Why do we care? Why is this something we need to practice? We know what questions are. We use them every day. So why are you going to bother listening to me talk about this? I think the real question is, we use question asking and kind of as a way to move a conversation along typically. We're not really driving and digging and looking for answers. It's more of a way to, just kind of make small talks at sometimes. So, if I'm chatting with a customer, it's not in the frame context of an interview, and I'm saying, how have you been? How's work? You were on vacation. How was that? I'm not even really paying attention necessarily. I might be just getting kind of surface level answers, but we're establishing a relationship, and it's a way to let them know that I'm interested in them, and it's a way for us to become comfortable with each other, but I'm not really learning a lot, and they're not really giving me really useful information. So I kind of equate this to the garbage in, garbage out philosophy. I haven't framed my questions in a very meaningful way, and as a result, I'm not getting very meaningful, useful answers. I think the second aspect of why this is so important, and something that isn't just necessarily going to come naturally to all of us, is that we aren't listening well. So even if we do ask very insightful questions, we have already moved on to the next thing by the time our customer responds. We're thinking about how we're going to respond to them. We're thinking about what we can say that will show them how smart we are or how informed we are about their industry or their company. And we're not really giving them our undivided attention, focus, and really listening to what they're saying. And because we're not paying really careful attention, it's really hard for us to dig in any deeper and really get to the root problem of the problem that we're trying to solve. And as product managers, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve problems for our customers, and they're a very essential key piece of that puzzle when we're trying to do that. So they can offer so much in the way of just experience, knowledge, across the board. So it's very important that we really listen to them. So my recommendations right off the bat, before you even reach out to somebody to schedule time with them, is to do your homework. I think the worst thing you can do is set up an interview with a customer. They're going to take time out of their day and agree to meet with you, and you've done no homework on them. You don't know who they are, what their role is, how they interact with your platform, what kind of user they are. That's, I feel like, very disrespectful and not a great use of their time. And on the flip side, not a good use of your time either, because you're going to be spending time establishing stuff that you likely could have figured out beforehand. So I would just stress, do your research first before you start to dive into more of a Q&A session. The other thing to think about is the channel. So it may be inconvenient for everybody to schedule an in-person interview, or your customers might be distributed. Web conferences versus in person might be easier. But there's also the consideration that using somebody's time for an in-person interview or a web conference isn't even necessary. If what you're trying to get is more of a quantitative response or to get people to kind of rank how they feel about things, survey might be your best bet. And that's kind of outside of the scope of this discussion. But I would just say, you have limited access to your customers, most likely. They have a limited amount of time. So back to my earlier point, you just want to use that time as efficiently as possible. So if something can be answered via email or a survey, I would say use that route first, and then move into the in-person interviews, the phone calls, the web conferences for really digging into the nitty-gritty and the meat of the issues. The other thing to keep in mind is that a phone call, you don't know what the other person's doing. You can't see their facial expressions. They could be on their computer and you're unaware of it, so you're missing some emotion or they're not totally engaged. So just think about how how important some of those emotional responses are going to be to you, and then think about the way you want to engage with them, whether a phone call is enough or if you really need to feel somebody's kind of visceral reaction to some of the things that you're asking. So once you've kind of, set the stage, you've done your research, you've decided that either speaking with somebody or sitting down with them is the right thing to do, you do want to lay that groundwork. I mean, I know I keep stressing don't waste their time, but you do need to establish some kind of rapport with these people. So introduce yourself, explain who you are, why you're there, why you care, thank them for their time, keep the focus on them, and figure out the best way to engage with them. So, it's really important to be respectful and mindful of somebody when you're speaking with them. And if you're asking questions and they seem uncomfortable, you want to be aware of that and respectful of that. You want to kind of have some kind of sense of who they are and how they like to engage before you really dig in, especially if you're driving into some kind of like hard details about their work or, what they're doing, that sort of thing. So one of the things I think that is a big challenge for product people, myself included, is the fact that a lot of times we get in our heads that there's a problem that needs to be solved and we just charge off to fix it. And we never confirm with our users that there's actually a problem. And I think that, that's a great way to waste engineering time. It's kind of like building something that you think is really cool without ever validating that you have users who would want to use it. You can spend a lot of time doing something really innovative and efficient and interesting, but if you don't have anybody who wants to use it, it is not a good use of time. Same thing with solving problems that are not a major pain point for your users. There are more likely other things that would take a higher priority on your backlog that are getting neglected. So I would say the first thing you want to do is just lay out the problem that you would like to solve and validate with your user that it's something that actually needs to be solved. And I think a great way to do this is to start to ask them about the problem. So if you're talking about a workflow, for example, and they're walking you through the steps and you go, oh, I see here that you're having to copy some information out of this particular platform and you're pasting it into this other platform. It feels like potentially that is not a great use of your time. And in your head, you're already thinking about ways to automate this. And you're like, oh, we need, an open API. So our platform can connect directly to that platform and we'll just automate that data exchange. And then your customer goes, I only do it like twice a year. And that's a good key to say, okay, that is something that would maybe be a nice to have, but it's not a problem that we have to solve today. The other thing that you really want to be cognizant of is that customers will love to give you their solutions to their problems. What you really need is for them to tell you what their problems are. And sometimes they're not going to tell you directly, so you kind of have to tease it out. So they'll say, what I really need is a button here that does X, Y, Z. And what you're really asking them for is, why do you need that button? What is the problem that you're trying to solve with that button? Because they're not necessarily in the best position to offer elegant solutions or solutions that will benefit your entire customer base. So I think, that's one thing to keep in mind. We do it as product people too. We're always thinking about solutions, but it's really important to be sure that we have a firm grasp of the problem. I think that's the starting point for all good software, is understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. And then once the nitty gritty of what you're trying to get, you really need to think about how you're going to ask these questions. So one of the things that I read kind of early on in my career about performing customer interviews is to think like a journalist. So think about when you see an interview on the news and it's really, hard-hitting journalism and they're really getting into kind of the emotions of a sensitive subject. I always kind of think of politics. So, somebody is really driving in on the why do you do things this way? Why are your beliefs what they are? You really want to be kind of dragging information out of people. And a great way to do this is to use open-ended questions. So you don't want yes or no answers. That's really just going to kind of end the conversation, and it doesn't give you a great way to keep things going and to keep kind of like digging into what's really going on. Because a lot of times a surface problem is the symptom of a deeper, more kind of systemic issue. So you really need to be able to dig deep and not just say, is this an issue for you? Customer says, yes, it is. And you go on about your day. You haven't really learned everything you need to know there. And to be able to do this, you really have to get comfortable with giving up control of a conversation. And this is really tough because you're the one who's trying to get the answers. You're the one that's likely set up this meeting. You know what outcomes you want, but you have to let your user, your customer, kind of run with things if you want to ever get any answers. And it may be that it gets a little bit off track and you try to guide them back towards what you're hoping to accomplish, but you can't be a control freak and say, no, that's not what I want to talk about. I'm here to talk about this. You really have to be comfortable with them kind of going off the rails and telling you a lot of side information. A lot of times there's kind of little hidden gems in that. And we'll get into some ways to do that. And first, I want to give you some examples of open-ended versus closed-ended questions. It seems pretty straightforward, but it is something that I catch myself doing sometimes. Ask a question that I think is open-ended and get a one-word response, and then I'm like, oh, I could have framed that much better. So just some examples of open-ended questions. What can make your work life easier? What's your biggest daily challenge? I think that's a great one if you are working on software that's a vital part of somebody's workday, because they'll say, with your platform, I have to do all of these manual steps, or I, am running into issues here or there. And then I think, what direction would you like to see our product grow? I think you get some great ideas from customers. These are also really good questions to ask your developers and your internal stakeholders as well. And then closed-ended questions would be more along the line of suggesting a solution and asking them to validate it. So would your life be easier if we offered you this feature? Framing it for them in a way where they're either confirming or denying, or just getting buy-in on something that you're suggesting. You really want to leave it more open for them to kind of think creatively and mull things over and kind of talk out loud and just really be listening as they do that. And then the thing that I found the hardest was getting comfortable with the sound of silence. So I, by nature, am kind of want to keep people comfortable. And if I'm chatting with someone, I want to make sure that everything is going smoothly and we're both having a good time and we're enjoying the conversation. And that kind of awkward silence where there's just like that last question hanging in the balance between you two just kind of makes me uncomfortable. But I've learned from other great product managers that giving people the opportunity to kind of let their wheels spin and think about how they're going to answer something is really important. I think my kind of gut reaction is to jump in and suggest something for them. And a lot of times people will just kind of go with whatever you say. But it's really important to let the person that you're speaking to respond to your question and not have you guide them towards an answer, because you're going to guide them towards your preconceived notion of what they're going to say. Even subconsciously, you're not going to mean to do it, but you're going to be getting answers that you expect if you do this. So you really need to ask a question and then just shut your mouth and sit there and wait for them to respond. And if they need to ask you to clarify the question, that's fine, they'll do that. But really just kind of pause, and let them come to you with a response instead of you being so uncomfortable that you have to jump in and fill that void. And then after that, you really need to keep peeling the onion down to get to the root of the problem. There's a great technique called the 5 whys. It's a 6 Sigma technique. If you Google it, there's a lot of information about it. But it's really trying to get at the root cause and not just grazing the surface of the symptoms. And kind of at a high level, it's almost like the way a toddler asks, why is the sky blue? And you say, well, it's, the reflection of water when the sun hits it. Well, why is there water in the sky? And then you're explaining, how evaporation works and how, a liquid can be suspended in the air. And you just, they just keep saying, why? And you keep answering those questions until you get down into a very detailed, very, scientific explanation. You can do that with your customers too. You have the opportunity to just keep digging, and, settling for the first answer that they give you is not always going to be the most informative. And then, along with continuing to dig and press, you also don't have to settle for bad answers. If somebody gives you an answer that's like, well, we've just always done it that way, not a great response. You really need to dig in and go, well, do you know why that is? Is it because it's a technology constraint, or is it some kind of like policy and procedure issue? You can really kind of push on this. It could be that your question isn't super clear, so you could think about reframing the question. You do want to be sensitive, again, to somebody getting frustrated. If you continue this kind of like interrogative line of questioning and you see somebody getting fidgety or irritated with you, take a breath, change the subject. You can revisit it later, take a note of it. But I do think that it's a great opportunity to just keep driving when you've got somebody kind of held hostage in a one-on-one situation like this. And then back to listening. I know I said this before, but don't be a control freak. So don't try to control the conversation or guide it in the direction you think it needs to go. Kind of let it go organically, or let the person that you're speaking to have some control over the direction that the conversation takes. I think also it's super important to pay very close attention. And again, this is really hard. We're thinking about our commute home, the next meeting we have, what we're going to have for dinner, and our minds aren't always really focused. And I think it's really important to try to quiet your mind and really give this person your undivided attention. I find that scheduling meetings earlier in the day, a lot of times it works for me because I'm not kind of mentally fatigued yet, and it's a lot easier for me to stay kind of tuned in. Another thing that I think is great, if you can, is to record the meeting or the interview. That's a great way to be able to go back and revisit if you come away and you have some questions about what you think you heard. If that's not an option, maybe having another person sitting in the interview with you so that you can either both be taking notes or one person can be taking notes. And that way you can kind of meet up after the fact and review and say, this is what I got from that. Is that what you understood? I think it can be kind of hard when it's you by yourself. You're doing the questioning, you're doing the response gathering, you're thinking about what you're going to be saying next, and you're missing some detail in there. So if there's a good way for you to set up some kind of recording or have somebody help you, I think it'll really benefit you in the long run. And then the other thing you want to do is reflect as soon as possible. So I know probably a lot of you are like me. I have stacks of notebooks in my desk that are hand-jotted thoughts and, kind of outcomes from meetings I've had and ideas for stuff we could be doing in the future. And when I go back and look at them, often they mean almost nothing to me, and at the time I'm sure that I thought that this shorthand that I was jotting down was going to make perfect sense, and it was going to be my next brilliant idea, and I was going to, take it to engineering and we were going to run with it. But instead, it's just a collection of words that is almost meaningless. So what I do now is if I meet with a customer, I either immediately or later that day sit down and review my notes and write things up in a more organized form that I could share with somebody else and would actually make sense for them. So for me, I like to handwrite notes during an interview so that I don't have the distraction of having my computer or my phone in front of me. But then I'll sit down with my notebook and just start to put things into Google Docs, and then I'll share it with anybody internally who might also be interested. And I think it's great to think about getting your notes into a human readable format as soon as possible because it forces you to review and reflect on the conversation. I think the more time there is between when you've actually done an interview and when you're collecting, your ideas and your thoughts that came out of it, the more likely you are to be missing things. And then the other thing you can do here is think about kind of, was your line of questioning appropriate? Did you ask the right questions? Are there things you wish you had asked? You can kind of go in and add those into the template so that the next customer you meet with, you remember to ask those questions, because more than likely, you're not going to just be talking to one person. You're going to be validating this problem and trying to learn about a multitude of users. So you can just keep practicing and keep kind of growing out, your template or your kind of resource of questions as you hone your technique and as you continue to dig for information across your user base. And then the best thing I can say is just practice. I mean, coming from an engineering background, this was a really hard thing for me to start doing. I kind of had this inherent fear of talking to customers because I didn't want them to know that maybe I wasn't an industry expert or I was a newer product manager. I kind of like didn't want to expose my weakness. But what I found is that people are more often than not very happy to talk to you and very happy to talk about themselves. So questions are a great way to keep people talking about themselves, about their jobs, about what they wish they had. So it's not as daunting as you think it's going to be. And every time you do it, it gets a little bit easier. So if you're in an organization where you have a lot of access to customers, I would say definitely take advantage of that. You're only going to get better at this. And if you are in a place where you haven't had a lot of exposure to customers, I would say, talk to your marketing team, your customer success team, your sales team, and see if you can start to lay some channels of communication so that you can get a little bit more access. I really do think that it's a really critical piece of the puzzle for a product manager to have that direct from the customer feedback when possible. I mean, obviously, a lot easier in some industries than others. But everywhere I've worked as a PM, I've really kind of tried to push for this access to customers, and it's been just hugely beneficial for me. So all I can say is just practice as much as possible. So any questions, I'd be happy to chat with you over email. I'm Sarah@evertrue.com. You can find me in the Product School Slack channel. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to chat about all things product. Always happy, to meet new like-minded product people. Maybe see you at a conference or something like that. So feel free to reach out. And just wanted to share a few resources that I think are really helpful here. The 5 whys technique that I mentioned earlier, I would say, Google that. There's a great kind of Wikipedia walkthrough of it. There's some stuff on the Six Sigma website. I think it's a really kind of great framework to bring to the table if you are feeling a little bit insecure about your technique. The Lean Product Playbook has some great suggestions for how to get some good information out of your customers and how to really make the most of those relationships. And then the Psychology Behind the Perfect Customer Interview, pretty self-explanatory right there in the title. Great resource if you're really trying to hone your skills engaging with your customers. So thank you so much for your time. I hope to hear from some of you, and all the best with your product endeavors. Bye.